party of divide and conquer is now loudly conducting an experiment, but instead of dividing its opposition through opportunistic fear, it seems to be dividing itself for reasons that are typically unclear. And in our fourth story on the countdown, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich decries the vocal but limited 20%. This after a prominent conservative magazine had featured the GOP's new leadership as Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, and Sarah Palin, and not Newt Gingrich. Mr. Gingrich, you may recall, is already in a proxy fight with former Governor Palin over a special election in a conservative congressional district in upstate New York. Gingrich backs the Republican candidate, while the governor supports the Conservative Party nominee. And on the national scene, there is more evidence of a party fracturing.
Well, I just think it's interesting. Two of the three people on the cover are talk radio hosts, and
Glenn Beck and Rush
Limbaugh. And they're fine people, and they have big audiences, and that's terrific. But you have a party which has Governor Haley Barbour, it has Governor Mitch Daniel, it has Governor Tim Pawlenty.
The former speaker continued to rattle off almost every conceivable Republican presidential candidate or contender for 2012 except Harold Stassen. He even said that former Governor Palin could be a national force if she does well on Oprah and on her book tour. However,
you know, you can have a very, very intense movement at 20%. You can't govern. To govern, you've got to get 50% plus one after the recount.
Since a recent poll placed self-identified Republicans at a new low, coincidentally at 20%, one wonders if Gingrich puts the Limbaugh-Beck-Palin crowd at 20% of 20%, which would be 4%, or if he thinks those disaffected Republicans already represent a breakaway bloc existing outside the GOP. In any event, Mr. Gingrich now joins South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham in daring to question whether Glenn Beck Tea Partying Republicans are the sharpest tools with which to try to rebuild the GOP House. Let's turn to the Washington editor of The Nation, Chris Hayes. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Let me start with the substance here. The special election in the upstate New York congressional seat. Is this as much of a litmus test as it seems about the Republican Party, or is it just, you know, great fun for Democrats?
No, I think it really is shaping up as kind of early skirmish in what is shaping up to be this big battle within the sort of conservative coalition, broadly the Republican Party. You're seeing tremendous amount of mobilization around the independent conservative right-wing candidate Doug Hoffman, and what's really interesting is to see the way that the Republicans who hope to have a shot at the presidential primary in 2012 are lining up endorsing this independent against their own party, which on the other side, if you want to look for your closest possible analogy, which was the Ned Lamont, Joe Lieberman primary, I mean, the Democratic Party was anathema to support Lamont at all, even after he won the primary. And so I think it's really interesting to see just how much power the conservative base has within the party right now.
Is the conservative base being paid by the Democratic National Committee to split the Republicans into two completely non-viable political parties in time for the 2012 election?
I doubt it. I mean, you know, what's that old? There's some Sun Tzu mantra about not getting in the way of your enemy when they're destroying themselves. I mean, I think there is every reason to believe that these kinds of, you know, purges are destructive for the party's long-term electoral prospects. I will say, however, that the progressive movement went through a period in the wilderness when its base really got mobilized, it really organized, and took on a lot of the party establishment, I think, to the great benefit of ultimately the Democratic Party. And so I wouldn't be too soon to scoff at what we're seeing here. I think in the short term, you know, you can't have a national political mandate for figures like Doug Hoffman at all. In the long term, however, this may pay off institutionally if you do see some sort of new blood within the Republican Party.
And that makes Gingrich's point of view even stranger. There was another interview he did in which he didn't really hesitate to underline this point. Let me quote it directly. If some people in the Republican Party want to go around the country purging everyone they disagree with, they're going to rapidly make this a party for a minority party for a generation, and they're going to guarantee the re-election of President Obama, and they're going to guarantee Nancy Pelosi stays as Speaker for the rest of her life. Is this his honest assessment? Is he correct, or is this, you know, Newt Gingrich as his dream of being Cincinnatus called out of retirement by a desperate and beholden nation?
Well, you know, I think he's I think that's what he believes, because, I mean, Newt Gingrich is a creature of the establishment. And the irony, of course, is that there was a time when I don't think he was. And in fact, there was a time in which, within the GOP's own internal battles, you know, essentially a generation ago now, he was the brash right-wing conservative purist who was taking on the sort of sluggish and kind of go-along, get-along members of the Republican Party in the House. He's now sort of now part of the establishment. And look, the quote that he gave, you could have heard identical quotes are being given all the time on both sides of the aisle by members of the sort of political establishment of whatever party it is, which is to say that, you know, you ideological purists, you don't understand what it takes, and that's a sort of you know, a perennial here in Washington.
Well, we'll see if he gets Lindsey Graham'd, and we'll see how bad it is and whether or not he winds up joining the Democrats. Chris Hayes of The Nation. Boy, that would be something. Many thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Keith.